This is episode 103 in our road to Unicum, and today we review the Centurion I. This is the British Tier 8 medium tank in World of Tanks, and 2 episodes ago I reviewed the Tier 9 Centurion 7-1, and a number of you had asked me about how to play the Tier 8 tank, and the short answer is this plays similarly to the Tier 9, its bigger brother, but obviously it's down a tier, and it has weaker weaponry, and relatively speaking, the vision control is not as good, partly because this tank, while appearing to be roughly the same size as the Centurion 7-1, actually has worse camo. So the interesting thing about the British medium tanks, and this is true for the American mediums too at the upper tiers, they have really good view range, but a poor camo, and because of this, they actually can get outspotted in a lot of situations by other medium tanks. Because what I found is that the difference you get in view range, like this tank has a superb view range of 400 meters base, but what other tanks get is a lot more camo. Camo ratings in the upper 20s, maybe 30s, and in a lot of situations the camo will offset differences in view range. Okay, so for a few things, when I play mediums, I tend to favor either going where our Progetto 46 originally did, which is a spot over at the E4 area out of the ditch, or if I've got a good hull down tank, what I'll do is come up and play the B lane. Now, their tanks immediately dived down from their little hill. There's a shelf over by B4, and their Centurion and their Skoda came down immediately. And the reason why I didn't continue around the corner on the B lane, there's a couple reasons. One, I didn't have any friendly tanks that were near enough for going with me, so I would have put myself in a 1 versus 2. The other thing is these enemy tanks, since they're sitting on the north side of this hill, they're pretty much shielded from our arties. Whereas if I move out into the B lane, I will be exposed to fire from their arties. So it's an asymmetrical situation, and you have to recognize this every time you're going to face opponents, whether or not they're arty. There's another good reason here I'm being careful to poke out on the Centurion 7-1. Because of the distance, he's obviously going to spot me. Now, what may be true is that those bushes that are behind him on the shelf, over by B4, there could be tanks hiding back there that I can't see because of the distance and because of those bushes. And if those tanks are there, they're going to have the first shot advantage. They can take their sweet time aiming in on me and hitting a weak spot like the hull of my tank, or in particular the lower hull, right? And so the thing that what I see a lot of people doing is they may mistake motion for action, right? Ernest Hemingway had a really famous quote, "Never confuse motion with action." It's one of my favorite things. And really what that means is just running around waving your hands trying to do something isn't really effective. Taking action that results in a meaningfully positive outcome is what you want to do. But what a lot of people tend to do, they hear from Unicums and Super Unicums, you want to keep your gun hot, you want to stay active, and what they would do is go around that corner on the B lane clockwise, expose themselves to lots of hardy fire, medium tank fire, die early, and then get frustrated with their team. The reality is people are going to do what they're going to do, right? I show a lot of matches in random battles, because if I showed you guys battles where I'm in a Super Unicum platoon or Unicum platoon, we tend to win a lot of battles and to win them pretty handily, because if you've got 3 people who are very good at the game on a team of 15, that tends to disproportionately influence outcomes. All right, there's a couple of things too. Watching my friendly tanks, our T-28 Prot was taking damage unnecessarily, right? And the big reason why is he was moving out and overexposing his side. So I knew that I couldn't trust him. Our Luva came north, which makes no sense whatsoever. And notice I'm staying to the right here, kind of on the low side of the ditch. Really what I want to do is I want to exit out of this situation. There isn't anything that I can do without putting my hit points at risk. And if you're an above average player or trying to be an above average player, you have to value your hit points more so than your enemy hit points. Like, yes, you want to deal damage, but not at the cost of giving up your hit points, right? And I would say, as a general benchmark, trading 1 for 1 doesn't net anything for your team in general, right? There's some situations, and I'll show this later, where it's worth it, right? And by the way, it is theoretically possible I could get spotted by the Progetto 46 if he's still on that shelf, but obviously the SU 130 PM and I tagged him, and so he lost a ton of his health, and I'm kind of toward the edge of that white view range circle, which you should definitely turn on. You guys should let me know if you'd be interested in me walking through my UI settings. I do cover them in my guide on my blog. If that's something you guys would be interested in seeing, let me know. I can post a video about that. There's a number of settings that I think can really enhance a person's gameplay, especially the view range circles and last spotted locations. Those are the two most critical things to do. Okay, so now that I've retreated down here by this F2 area, and there's like a couple different places where there is that magical trifecta of a rock with adjacent bushes with a good field of fire. By the way, this is the other thing that I anticipate. See there, Charioteer. He has pushed along the E lane, and the reason why is we don't have anyone to spot him coming in, right? He's able to push up there and tank flanking shots on our tanks over where the T-28 prod is and where our heavy was. There's nothing to brush them off, right? And until they come around the corner, they're already safe. So they're being careful not to expose themselves. So basically what I recognized, 2 minutes ago was staying over by C2 was no bueno. I couldn't take shots without getting arties. That Centurion was a hull down. There was a risk of eventually getting flanked. And I'm trying to think about where to go here. The thing is, I always tell you guys, you can't give up ground for free. And by the way, I really don't like what our T-44 does. He hits a shot on the move but tries to cross. He could have died there. It's not worth it. When you're one shot like that, you've got to be a lot more careful. And he could have just peeked out and shot where I did and pulled back behind the rock. Granted, they missed him when he crossed, but he's basically rolling the dice and trying not to get hit, right? And then there he's peeking for no reason, and then he got killed. But a match like this, you'll notice our Progetto 46, a good player, he's pivoted over to the H1 shelf, right? And so he's far enough that they may not be able to spot him. There's some bush cover there. Snipers often go there. And so what I'm trying to do is, keep these guys lit so that our arties can shoot them. I can work my gun and, finally get a meaningful amount of damage, and we can delay their push. But what our Progetto is seeing is that their Progetto is in the ditch. And so, that's a potential 1v1 situation. He has to be careful because of the Skoda. And this is one of these things, like if you have those two tanks, they can combine for 6 shots, and that will easily kill any medium tank on our team, even if they have full hit points. Okay, and then you'll notice here, okay, so now we know where the Progetto 46 is. He's peeking toward me. You can see our Progetto is now going counterclockwise to see if he can get a pick from the rear. Aggressive play, but it's also pretty heady one, and if I were in his situation, I would do the same thing too. Okay, so I tapped that Charioteer. I believe this might have been the same Charioteer that I shot earlier. And so, I've been careful with my hit points. I'm at full hit points. Now, the thing I don't want to let him do is climb up the slope that's just ahead of me to the left where I came up. If he gets behind me, he can control when we see each other. He can eventually whittle me away, and I'll die. So what I decided is this is one situation where it's worth going ahead and spending your hit points to take out an enemy tank, right? Because he's the tank that represents the greatest threat to me personally, and also he can spot for his enemies. Now, one thing which kind of sucks here is, I did get stunned. This affected my reload, made the tank a little bit cumbersome, and I rammed him initially, and then the second time I overshot him, which was not good. And obviously, a tank like this, I weigh more than he does. Centurions for mediums, they're pretty heavy because they bring a fair amount of turret armor. Okay, but in that case, trading 1 for 1 with him, that's worth it. He's dead. I killed him. And we have the opportunity now to wipe out their push on the western side of the map. And our Progetto, unfortunately gets picked off by the arty, but we've now cleared this and have a huge advantage. Now, they just have the T-28. This is a really interesting thing to consider on a map like this. There are lots of maps. This is true of Live Oaks. This is true for Westfield. This is true on this map where even if you win the brawling area, right, and the main brawling area in this map is on the eastern side of the map, you have to exit into very long vision lanes. And by that I mean you have to go across very exposed ground where snipers can be firing at you that you can't see, and especially arty, right? And so that's why, in a battle like this, sometimes a team, like their team did, will win the eastern side of the map, but then they get stuck trying to push out, and in this case, especially with a battle with like 3 arty, trying to move west along the H lane can be an exercise in futility and misery, right? You just get like absolutely wrecked. Now our M40, I don't know what the thought process of this player is, and I'm trying to tell him to just wait. Like, I will more than happily come spot. You don't want to spot the T-28 with your face because he can one-shot you, right? And then now, considering that out in front of our arty, he's actually in a good position because he can fire north along the 8 and 9 lanes, right? Because there's a few things. You saw earlier, our AMX tank destroyer went clockwise around the map, perfectly reasonable approach, but it got picked off. And it's clear that the T-28 has retreated. So he's either on the south side of that hill on the shelf, yeah, right there. And this is kind of where I was expecting to see him. The other location he could be is somewhere on the 9 or 0 lane. There are like a number of ridges with little bushes. I got one really nice shot there on his lower plate. It shows his yellow penetration indicator, but of course, it's worth taking the shot. I did low roll on the damage, but that's okay. I dropped him down to one-shot territory. I already finishes him off. And right here, what I probably should have done is just backed up as soon as he already fired and gone further down. And it might have done a little less splash damage. And then what I'm doing here, I really should have waited until my crew's no longer stunned, because that really affects your commander's ability to spot. There's potential that there's an arty 1 or 2 squares directly to the north of me. Most likely he's in the back corner, right? But you got to be careful. Like after you've been lit, especially if your crew is stunned, your commander is and his view range gets like cut down to like more, like in half or more so. Here I can wait, right? Our M40 has got shots on him, and then I've got high explosive loaded. Some of the arties, in particular the American and French arties, are very paper thin, whereas the Russian and the German arties have much more armor, and so I would tend to stick with AP or APCR against them. But obviously with the direction indicator, we know exactly where this arty is. He's going to be in that back corner. And check this out. So obviously as I'm driving towards him, I might still be lit, but just in case I'm not, I pick a line or a vector where there are bushes that I'm moving towards, and that's to delay his ability to see me. You would do this. You guys always hear me take good approach lanes. It's so important for conserving your hit points, not getting spotted, sneaking up on enemies, and getting that first shot advantage. Okay, so that was a bit of a long battle, a lot to talk about. And I do really love the fact that there are so many same tier battles. The matchmaking was quote unquote, in my opinion, fixed last year, where there's a lot more all same tier battles or a 1-tier spread like there is here, tier 9s and tier 8s, as opposed to having a lot of, battles where like tier 8s are facing tier 10s. And so, for this reason, for a long time, tier 8 was a pretty brutal tier to play, because a lot of times you get with the old 357 matchmaking, you get pulled into battles facing 3 tier 10, 5 tier 9, and then a bunch of poor unfortunate tier 8s, and it made it pretty rough to play, right? But now that the matchmaking has been changed, it is much more enjoyable, and you will still get pulled into tier 10 battles. That's life in World of Tanks, but it's nowhere near the frequency it used to be. Now on this map, I tend to play the south because there's a lot more flexibility here. The main decision you have to make, and this is kind of like the hill in Mines or the hill in Corellia, am I going to rush the hill or not? In this case, the place you could go is the ditch. Now the thing about going in the ditch is, if you go into the ditch, but your team is too chicken to go with you, you end up in the ditch alone, facing 1 or 2 tanks, especially if one of those tanks is much more tougher than you. Like, let's say they're 257s, you ran into the ditch. That would be a very bad situation to be in, right? And, tank like the 257 could bully me. Now, as it turns out, their heavies and our heavies have all stopped at our respective buildings here. There's a number of reasons why the ditch is really powerful if your team is willing to get into it, right? That north-south trench, and you're going to see me work that. And now that the T-34 is going, I'm going to go ahead and push into the trench too. Right, there is the possibility that I'm going to get shot on the way down. I don't get spotted. He does, because, as a heavy, he doesn't have camo. And what I want to do is get rid of this Lynx if I can out of the middle, or flush him out of the pocket, and so he'll be hittable by for example, our Rheinmetall Borsig or other tanks. I am very much not a fan, even when I'm playing a tank destroyer, of playing that ridge where our Rheinmetall Borsig is. There's a corresponding, ledge over by, let's say F8, F8, G8 area, because it's such a passive position, and a lot of times you won't be able to shoot tanks. Now, I was surprised there. Carnarvon did manage to hit me, and so I'm going to back up a little bit here. The good thing about being in the trench, if that Lynx had not opted to stay in there, I could have bullied him and killed him. But, I've driven him out, and now really the thing to understand about this map, and why so many people get this wrong, people treat this game as an east-west advancement game. I'm going to win C lane, or I'm going to win A lane, I'm going to win J lane. And those are all things that you should try to do. But the main thing that determines the outcomes on this map is that whichever team more effectively leverages the north-south crossfire, right? Because where I am now, there's a building to my right, so if there are any snipers to the east of me, they can't physically see me, right? And there's so much bush cover here that these heavies don't, even their M46, they don't have a prayer spotting me. Notice this guy, he's rotating his hull. He's actually giving me a longer target. I was shooting him in the back because he was facing north and shooting to the left. And then even these tanks here, this Russian heavy is facing to the west. So for incoming fire from the west, he is correctly, pointing his hull at them. But for me, that's just giving me a long, wide landscape target to hit. Right? And there's really nothing they could do. They could try blind firing my position, but they have no way of spotting me, given how thick the bush cover is and the place that I put my tank. Now, I have been missing out on an opportunity to hit a particular tank, so I want you guys look at the mini-map and try to figure out which tank that is. But for now, there's no reason for me to leave this position. I'm in a tremendously strong position. The only way they could dig me out is if their IS-3A and or Object 257 push the trench. If they do that, obviously I've got the T-34 with me. Now, I would not push the trench if I felt that I was going to get abandoned or picked off. It's the same thing in mines, and that's why, when I'm, solo queuing, I talk to my team before the countdown ends and see if anyone else is going to come up with me to the hill on mines. If the answer is no, then I don't go, right? Because the worst thing I can do is put myself up there against even or superior numbers and either lose lots of my hit points or just get flat out killed, right? And that's one of the most important things. You have, if you want to get good at this game, you have to value your hit points more than your opponents, right? And it's not good to trade 1-for-1. A lot of people will do it. It's a very bad habit. I only, that last battle in Mannerheim Line, you guys saw me trade 1-for-1 in terms of damage with the charioteer, but in that case it was worth it, and I had carefully preserved my hit points to that point, right? Now, you'll notice too, I'm not, flexing. Usually what you'll see in my replays is quite a bit of repositioning and flexing. In this case, I'm in a super strong position, and if they don't try to dig me out and there's not a tank that can spot me based on proximity, I can sit here all day long and take these shots. And I've already worked up about 1900 damage, softened up a lot of their heavies so that it makes it easier for our guys to finish them off. And then this M46, he's doing a good job rocking back and forth. The thing is, it's only a matter of time before I kill him. And then here, looks like he was facing off to the north. And then check this out. You can see here with the Carnarvon that the back of his turret is showing as green. The only reason why that's the case, if you look at the mini-map, he's facing to the north. He's facing away from me, and that's because we've got a breakthrough happening on the A and B lines, right? But this is allowing me, to put shots in the back of that British heavy's head. And at this point now, the score says 75, but we have got far better map positioning. Not, if you look at this now, there are tanks on the north of the C lane railroad tracks are tremendously exposed now, and those are tanks, the Lanson and the Lynx, which are not really built for brawling, and our heavies have pushed around. But I helped our heavies on the C lane face opponents that were weaker so they could finish them off, right? And that's part of the benefit of having this north-south crossfire. Okay, so you can see here they've got a Scorpion and a TS5. That shot doesn't land. That's not a high percentage shot. The other thing I could seek to do is maybe get a tracking shot, but I'm going to pick on the squishier target and hit that Scorpion. Generally speaking, you want to do that. If you've got two targets and one of them you're not sure if will pen, but the other one you will, take the easier shot. That's a very common sense approach, but you want to whittle down your opponents. In a tank like the Scorpion has a pretty dangerous gun, high penetration, high alpha gun. And here I'm going to make a mistake. I'm going to back up while I'm lit, and that 257 is side scraping. He takes off a very big chunk of my hit points. Now, the other really big benefit of being in the trench is you can play down from K5, K6, right? Peek up the ridge, shoot laterally on tanks in front of you, and then drop down so you can minimize your exposure. Now, while you're doing this, you can be exposed to snipers that are in the back corners of the K lane, and definitely to Artie. But that being said, being able to control your exposure is a really powerful thing. And you'll notice just by peeking up here, I spotted their Udes, who is panicking and running. Really, that Udes should be sitting down at K0 and either firing north or firing west, taking his shots, but he kind of panicked and started to run away, even though, the worst thing he can do is to do that. That tank is not built for brawling. It has no meaningful armor. All it's got is camo. Incredible camo and a very high pen gun. Their TS5 is facing me. I do have the hit points. I could actually eat a shot from him and survive, but I'm going to go ahead and track him, and that's going to give me, when the Rheinmetall one-shot him for his remaining hit points, I get all that juicy experience, which is really nice. So I'm going to be looking at the 430U line. You guys have been asking me about it. I have not played the T44 in years and just picked it up again recently. So we'll be taking a look at that line and potentially the Leopard 1 line as well. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Take care.